February 8, 1944, off the coast of Woleai Atoll in the Caroline Islands, Commander Samuel David Dealey stood in the conning tower of USS Harder, his eyes fixed on a sight that would have made most submarine captains retreat to safer depths. Through the periscope's narrow field of view, he watched a Japanese destroyer bearing down on his position at full speed, her bow wave churning white against the dark Pacific waters. The destroyer's crew had detected Harder's presence and was charging in for the kill. Depth charges ready, sonar pinging frantically to pinpoint the submarine's exact location. Most commanders would have gone deep, rigged for silent running, and hoped to slip away undetected. Dealey did the opposite. He turned Harder directly toward the oncoming destroyer, closed to point-blank range, and prepared to fire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This moment crystallized everything that made Dealey and Harder legendary in the annals of submarine warfare. While other submarines hunted merchant ships and avoided warship escorts, Harder actively sought out destroyers, the very vessels designed to kill submarines. Dealey had developed a tactic so audacious it bordered on suicidal, the down-the-throat shot. Instead of firing torpedoes at a destroyer's vulnerable broadside, Dealey would aim directly at the narrow bow profile as the warship charged toward him. The mathematics were brutal. A destroyer approaching at 25 knots closed the distance at terrifying speed. Firing too early meant the destroyer could maneuver and avoid the torpedoes. Firing too late meant depth charges would rain down before the torpedoes reached their target. The window for a successful shot measured in seconds, requiring perfect judgment of range, speed, and angle. One miscalculation meant death for Harder and her entire crew of 80 men. Yet Dealey had such confidence in his calculations and his crew's precision that he would wait until the destroyer was close enough to see individual sailors on her deck before giving the order to fire. The destroyer closing on Harder that February morning was typical of the Japanese escort vessels that protected convoys and hunted American submarines throughout the Pacific. She displaced approximately 2,000 tons, carried a main armament of 4 or 5 5-inch guns, possessed a top speed exceeding 30 knots, and was equipped with depth charges and primitive sonar. Japanese destroyers were formidable warships, fast and deadly, crewed by sailors who had trained for years in anticipation of surface combat against enemy fleets. What they had not trained for, what their doctrine did not emphasize, was anti-submarine warfare against an enemy who refused to run. The Imperial Japanese Navy viewed submarines primarily as fleet scouts, vessels that would support battleship engagements and avoid direct combat with surface warships. This doctrine shaped how Japanese destroyers responded to submarine contacts. They would charge in aggressively, attempting to force the submarine deep and then pummel it with depth charges until it was destroyed or driven away. Against conventional submarine tactics, this approach worked reasonably well. Against Samuel Dealey's revolutionary approach, it proved catastrophic. Dealey let the destroyer close to less than 1,000 yards, a range so short that failure meant certain death. His executive officer, Frank Lynch, called out ranges and bearings with mechanical precision. The torpedo data computer, a mechanical analog device that calculated firing solutions, whirred and clicked as it processed the inputs. Fire controlmen adjusted settings on the torpedoes themselves, ensuring they would run at the correct depth and speed. Everything depended on timing, coordination, and the absolute trust Dealey's crew placed in their captain's judgment. At 900 yards, Dealey gave the order. 3 Mark 14 torpedoes ejected from Harder's forward tubes in rapid succession, their electric motors driving them toward the oncoming destroyer at 46 knots. For agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The destroyer continued charging forward, apparently unaware that 3 torpedoes were racing directly toward her bow. Then, in quick succession, all 3 weapons struck. The destroyer's thin bow armor offered no protection against torpedoes designed to penetrate heavy battleship hulls. The first torpedo struck just below the waterline, blowing a massive hole in the forward compartments. The second hit amidships, detonating beneath the engine rooms and breaking the destroyer's keel. The third struck aft, severing the stern section and destroying the steering gear. The destroyer, which moments before had been a deadly threat bearing down on Harder with lethal intent, simply disintegrated. Her bow crumpled, her midsection sagged, and her stern rose vertically before the entire vessel slid beneath the waves in less than 2 minutes. There were no survivors. Dealey brought Harder to periscope depth and surveyed the debris field, oil slicks, floating wreckage, and the unmistakable evidence of a catastrophic kill. He marked the position, noted the time, and resumed patrol. For Dealey, this was not an extraordinary achievement but standard procedure. Another destroyer eliminated, another threat removed from the Pacific theater. What the Japanese Navy did not yet understand, what their intelligence officers would struggle to comprehend over the coming months, was that Harder represented a fundamental shift in submarine warfare doctrine. American submarines were no longer avoiding destroyers. They were hunting them. This evolution in tactics, combined with finally reliable torpedoes and commanders willing to take calculated risks, would transform the submarine war in the Pacific from a campaign of merchant ship attrition into a comprehensive assault on Japan's entire naval capability. USS Harder's journey to becoming the most feared submarine in the Pacific began at the Electric Boat Company shipyard in Groton, Connecticut, where her keel was laid on December 1st, 1941, just 6 days before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. She was a Gato-class submarine, the workhorse of America's underwater fleet during World War II. The Gato-class boats represented the culmination of decades of submarine development, incorporating lessons learned from earlier designs and engineering innovations that gave American submarines significant advantages over their adversaries. Harder measured 311 feet 9 inches in length, displaced 1,525 tons on the surface and 2,424 tons submerged. Her pressure hull, constructed from high-tensile steel, was designed to withstand the crushing pressures encountered at depths exceeding 400 feet. This deep-diving capability proved crucial in combat, allowing submarines like Harder to escape beneath the effective range of most depth charges. Earlier fleet submarines, limited to maximum depths around 300 feet, were far more vulnerable to determined escort attacks. The submarine's propulsion system exemplified the dual-mode design that gave American submarines their tactical flexibility. On the surface, 4 Fairbanks Morse diesel engines generated 5,300 horsepower, pushing Harder to a maximum speed of 20 1/4 knots. These engines simultaneously charged 4 massive battery banks containing 252 cells, each weighing over 1,000 pounds. Submerged operations relied entirely on electric motors drawing power from these batteries, providing a maximum underwater speed of 8 3/4 knots and allowing silent running at slower speeds for up to 48 hours. This combination of surface speed and submerged endurance gave submarine commanders options unavailable to earlier designs. They could sprint ahead of enemy convoys on the surface, dive to avoid detection, attack using silent electric power, then surface again to escape at high speed or pursue additional targets. The range and endurance figures were equally impressive. Harder could cruise 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots on the surface without refueling, enough to reach Japan from Pearl Harbor, conduct extended patrols in enemy waters, and return safely to base. She carried provisions for 90 days at sea, sufficient food, fresh water, and supplies to sustain 87 officers and men through patrols lasting months in the hostile environment of the Western Pacific. Armament defined a submarine's purpose, and Harder carried weapons optimized for both torpedo attacks and surface engagements. 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, provided devastating firepower. The forward tubes were arranged in 2 tiers, allowing rapid salvo firing that could saturate a target area with multiple weapons simultaneously. The after tubes enabled attacks during escape maneuvers or against pursuing escorts, turning retreat into deadly counterattack. Each torpedo tube could be reloaded in approximately 8 minutes by a well-trained crew, allowing submarines to conduct multiple attacks before exhausting their ammunition. Harder's normal loadout was 24 torpedoes, a mix of Mark 14 steam-powered and Mark 18 electric weapons. The Mark 14 torpedo, after years of catastrophic failures and bureaucratic denial, had finally been corrected by late 1943. These weapons measured 20 feet 6 inches in length, weighed 3,154 pounds, and carried a 663-pound Torpex warhead. They could reach targets at ranges exceeding 6,000 yards, running at speeds up to 46 knots. The Mark 18 electric torpedo, introduced in 1943, offered a critical advantage. It left no visible wake. Steam-powered torpedoes created a distinctive white trail that alert lookouts could track back to the submarine's position. Electric torpedoes ran silently beneath the surface, making them far harder to detect and impossible to trace to their source. For surface engagements, Harder carried a single 5-inch 25 caliber deck gun mounted forward of the conning tower. This weapon proved invaluable for attacking small vessels not worth precious torpedoes, finishing off damaged ships, and engaging targets in shallow waters where submerged approaches were impossible. Additionally, twin 40mm Bofors guns and smaller 20mm Oerlikon cannons provided anti-aircraft defense, essential in waters where Japanese patrol aircraft posed constant threats. The submarine's electronic systems gave her eyes and ears far beyond human capabilities. Radar, still a relatively new technology in 1942, allowed Harder to detect surface contacts at ranges exceeding 15 miles in favorable conditions, providing crucial early warning and enabling night surface attacks when visual detection was nearly impossible. Sonar systems, both active and passive, could detect submerged contacts and listen for enemy propeller sounds at significant distances. These electronic sensors, combined with skilled operators who learned to interpret the subtle signatures of different vessel types, transformed submarines from blind hunters into informed predators. USS Harder was commissioned on December 2, 1942, with Lieutenant Commander Samuel David Dealey assuming command. Dealey was 30 years old, a graduate of the Naval Academy class of 1930, and he brought to his command a unique combination of calculated aggression and mathematical precision. Unlike some submarine commanders who relied primarily on instinct or experience, Dealey approached combat as an engineering problem with variables that could be measured, calculated, and exploited. He understood the physics of torpedo trajectories, the geometry of attack angles, and the mathematics of closing speeds. More importantly, he possessed the psychological courage to put himself and his crew in positions of extreme danger when the calculations indicated success was probable. This combination of technical mastery and personal bravery would define Harder's war patrols and establish new standards for submarine warfare effectiveness. Dealey's path to command had been conventional by naval standards. After graduating from the academy in 1930, he served aboard surface vessels before volunteering for submarine duty in 1931. He completed submarine school in New London, Connecticut, and served aboard several older submarines during the 1930s. learning his trade in the unglamorous peacetime Navy, where mechanical reliability and navigation precision mattered more than combat tactics. When war came in December 1941, Dealey was serving as executive officer aboard USS S-20, an obsolete submarine conducting training operations. His performance impressed his superiors sufficiently that he received command of Harder immediately upon her commissioning. The faith placed in Dealey proved entirely justified. From Harder's first war patrol through her final mission, Dealey demonstrated tactical innovation, personal courage, and crew leadership that placed him among the most effective submarine commanders in naval history. Harder's crew reflected the demographic reality of America's wartime submarine force. They were overwhelmingly young, mostly in their late teens and early 20s, drawn from every region of the country and every social background. Submarine duty was entirely voluntary. No one was drafted into submarines. Men volunteered for multiple reasons. The extra pay, 50% above surface ship wages, attracted many. The perceived adventure and excitement of submarine warfare appealed to others. Some were drawn by the submarine service's reputation as an elite force, where merit mattered more than rank or connections. Whatever their initial motivations, submariners quickly learned that their survival depended absolutely on the competence and reliability of every man aboard. A single mistake by any crew member could doom the entire boat. This reality forged bonds of trust and mutual dependence stronger than those found in most military units. Harder's crew became exceptionally proficient through relentless training and actual combat experience. Dealey drilled his men constantly on emergency procedures, damage control, torpedo firing, and silent running protocols. He cross-trained crew members so that critical positions had multiple qualified operators. He established standards of performance that exceeded normal peacetime expectations and maintained those standards through example and insistence. The submarine service attracted a particular type of personality, men who could function effectively in confined spaces for months at a time, who could remain calm under the stress of depth charge attacks, and who possessed the technical aptitude to maintain complex machinery under combat conditions. Living conditions aboard Gato-class submarines tested even the most adaptable personalities. 87 men shared spaces that would be considered cramped for half that number. Officers slept in tiny staterooms, barely large enough for a bunk and small desk. Enlisted men, hot-bunked, sharing berths in rotating shifts because there were insufficient bunks for everyone to sleep simultaneously. The air grew increasingly foul as patrols progressed, saturated with moisture, diesel fumes, cooking odors, and the accumulated smells of 87 men living in close proximity without adequate washing facilities. Temperatures in tropical waters often exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit inside the pressure hull, with humidity approaching 100%. Men worked, stripped to the waist, constantly drenched in sweat, fighting to maintain machinery and systems in conditions that would be considered intolerable ashore. Fresh food lasted perhaps 2 weeks before exhaustion, after which meals consisted primarily of canned goods and preserved provisions. Fresh water was severely rationed. Submariners went weeks without proper showers or adequate laundry facilities. Yet, despite these hardships, morale aboard successful submarines like Harder remained remarkably high. Combat effectiveness provided purpose. Successful attacks validated the crew's training and sacrifices. The knowledge that they were inflicting genuine damage on Japan's war effort sustained morale through the worst conditions. Dealey's leadership style emphasized respect for his crew and recognition of their essential contributions. He explained his tactical decisions when circumstances permitted, helping crew members understand why he made choices that sometimes placed them in extreme danger. This transparency built trust. Harder's crew believed their captain would not waste their lives on pointless risks, but would commit them to action when success was achievable, and the mission justified the danger. The bond between Dealey and his crew became legendary throughout the submarine force. After commissioning and shakedown cruises to test systems and train the crew, Harder departed New London on May 18, 1943, transited the Panama Canal, and arrived at Pearl Harbor on June 21. The submarine force at Pearl Harbor in mid-1943 was emerging from the most frustrating period in American naval history. For 18 months following Pearl Harbor, American submarines had conducted aggressive patrols, achieved numerous torpedo hits on enemy vessels, and watched in disbelief as their weapons failed to detonate. The Mark 14 torpedo, the primary weapon of the submarine force, suffered from 3 catastrophic design flaws that combined to make it nearly worthless in combat. The depth control mechanism was miscalibrated by approximately 10 feet, causing torpedoes to run deeper than their set depth and pass beneath targets without making contact. The contact exploder, designed to detonate when the torpedo struck a ship's hull, failed approximately 70% of the time due to a design flaw that caused the firing pin mechanism to deform on impact rather than trigger the detonator. The magnetic influence exploder, intended to detonate beneath a ship's keel by sensing changes in the Earth's magnetic field, exploded prematurely or not at all due to variations in magnetic fields at different latitudes and the influence of a target ship's own magnetic signature. These problems were not unknown to submarine crews. From the war's earliest days, commanders filed detailed reports documenting torpedo failures. They described watching torpedoes strike targets and bounce off without exploding. They reported torpedoes exploding prematurely, alerting targets to the submarine's presence. They documented torpedoes running beneath targets at excessive depths, wasting weapons and opportunities. The Bureau of Ordnance, responsible for torpedo design and production, responded to these reports with denial, blame, and bureaucratic obstruction. Bureau officials insisted the torpedoes were perfect, and any failures resulted from crew incompetence or poor shooting. They rejected calls for systematic testing, arguing that combat reports were unreliable, and commanders simply needed better training. This institutional denial persisted for 2 years, while American submarines wasted their greatest opportunities of the war. Japanese merchant shipping sailed with minimal escorts during 1942 and early 1943, presenting easy targets. American submarines achieved perfect firing positions, launched torpedoes at point-blank range, and watched helplessly as their weapons failed. The strategic consequences were enormous. Japan's conquest of Southeast Asia and the East Indies proceeded with minimal interference because American submarines could not sink the transports and cargo ships that supplied the advancing armies. Admiral Charles Lockwood, who assumed command of Submarine Force Pacific in February 1943, finally forced the Bureau of Ordnance to acknowledge reality. Lockwood ordered systematic tests conducted under controlled conditions where variables could be measured precisely. Submarines fired torpedoes at nets suspended at measured depths, proving conclusively that the weapons ran 10 feet deeper than set. They fired at cliffs to test contact exploders, demonstrating failure rates exceeding 70% when torpedoes struck at perpendicular angles. These tests, conducted throughout mid-1943, provided undeniable evidence of the torpedo defects. Faced with data they could not dismiss, Bureau of Ordnance officials grudgingly authorized corrections. The depth control was recalibrated. The contact exploder was redesigned with a more robust firing mechanism. The magnetic exploder was deactivated entirely, eliminating one source of failures, even though it also eliminated a potentially effective detonation method. By September 1943, American submarines finally possessed reliable weapons. The transformation in effectiveness was immediate and dramatic. Submarines that had struggled to sink 1 or 2 ships per patrol suddenly began achieving 5, 10, or more sinkings. Commanders who had been blamed for poor shooting were vindicated as working torpedoes struck targets and exploded as designed. The submarine war in the Pacific shifted from frustration to devastation. Harder departed Pearl Harbor on June 21, 1943, for her first war patrol with orders to operate in the waters around Truk, the heavily fortified Japanese naval base in the Caroline Islands. The patrol would test both the submarine and her crew under actual combat conditions, revealing whether Dealey's aggressive training methods and tactical theories would translate into results. The answer came quickly. On July 7th, Harder encountered a Japanese convoy consisting of 3 cargo ships, escorted by 2 destroyers. Most submarine commanders would have waited for the escorts to move away before attacking the merchants, minimizing the risk of counterattack. Dealey approached the problem differently. He reasoned that if he could eliminate one escort first, the convoy would be thrown into confusion, making subsequent attacks easier. He maneuvered Harder into firing position on the nearest destroyer, closed to 1,000 yards, and launched a spread of 3 torpedoes. 2 struck the destroyer amidships, breaking her back and sending her to the bottom within minutes. The second destroyer immediately charged toward Harder's position, forcing Dealey to go deep and endure a depth charge attack that lasted 30 minutes. When Harder returned to periscope depth, the convoy had scattered. Dealey spent the next 6 hours hunting down the cargo ships one by one, sinking 2 and damaging the third before breaking off the attack to avoid Japanese aircraft summoned by the surviving vessels. This first engagement established the pattern that would define all of Harder's war patrols. Dealey sought combat aggressively, attacked escorts when tactical advantage permitted, and pressed attacks until either his torpedoes were exhausted or the tactical situation became untenable. His crew responded to this aggressive leadership with exceptional performance. Fire control teams calculated firing solutions with mechanical precision. Torpedo room crews loaded tubes in record time, enabling rapid follow-up attacks. Engineering crews maintained propulsion and electrical systems under combat stress that would have broken less disciplined teams. During that first patrol, Harder sank 5 confirmed ships totaling approximately 18,000 tons. The Navy awarded the submarine her first Presidential Unit citation, and Dealey received the Navy Cross. More importantly, Dealey had proven his tactical theories worked. Aggressive attacks on escorts did not result in the submarine's destruction, but rather in confusion among enemy forces and increased opportunities against merchant shipping. The lesson was noted by other submarine commanders, who began adopting similar tactics with equally devastating results. Harder's second war patrol, conducted from September through November 1943, took the submarine to the waters around Tarawa and Makin in the Gilbert Islands, where American amphibious forces were preparing major assaults. Dealey's orders included reconnaissance missions to photograph beach defenses and lifeguard duty to rescue downed American pilots during carrier strikes. These support missions demonstrated the submarine force's versatility beyond pure commerce raiding. On October 20th, while conducting reconnaissance off Tarawa, Harder encountered a Japanese submarine on the surface. Dealey immediately surfaced and pursued at flank speed, a risky decision given that Japanese submarines carried powerful deck guns and could potentially sink Harder in a surface engagement. The 2 submarines raced toward each other at closing speeds exceeding 30 knots. At 2,000 yards range, Dealey fired 2 torpedoes. Both missed, as the Japanese submarine turned hard to avoid. Harder continued closing, firing 4 more torpedoes at ranges decreasing to 500 yards. The 6th torpedo struck the Japanese submarine squarely amidships, detonating her torpedo room and causing a catastrophic explosion that sent the enemy vessel straight to the bottom. No survivors were recovered. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes from initial contact to final sinking, demonstrating both the lethal efficiency of submarine warfare and the razor-thin margins between success and disaster. During the same patrol, Harder rescued 7 American aviators shot down during carrier raids on Japanese positions. Dealey brought the submarine dangerously close to shore, surfacing within sight of Japanese coastal batteries to recover pilots floating in their life rafts. On one occasion, Japanese artillery opened fire on Harder while she was taking pilots aboard, forcing Dealey to remain on the surface until all aviators were recovered before diving to escape the bombardment. The rescued pilots later testified that Dealey's calm demeanor under fire and his absolute determination to recover every downed airman inspired confidence even in the most dangerous circumstances. These lifeguard missions, conducted throughout the war by numerous American submarines, saved hundreds of aviators who would otherwise have been captured or killed. They also demonstrated to flight crews that submarines would risk everything to rescue them, boosting morale among carrier pilots who knew that if they went down, submariners would come for them regardless of the danger. Harder's third war patrol marked the beginning of the submarine's legendary reputation as a destroyer killer. Departing Pearl Harbor in December 1943, Dealey requested assignment to the waters around the Mariana Islands and the Western Carolines, areas with heavy Japanese naval activity. On December 28th, Harder detected a destroyer conducting anti-submarine patrol near Woleai. Instead of avoiding the warship, Dealey maneuvered Harder directly into the destroyer's path, waited until the range closed to 800 yards, and fired a spread of 4 torpedoes. 3 struck the destroyer, which exploded with such violence that debris rained down around Harder's periscope. The destroyer sank in less than 90 seconds, taking her entire crew with her. 2 days later, Dealey attacked another destroyer using the same down-the-throat tactic, firing at point-blank range as the warship charged toward Harder's position. 2 torpedoes struck home, breaking the destroyer's back and sending her to the bottom within minutes. Japanese naval commanders began receiving reports of a ghost submarine that appeared without warning, destroyed escorts with impossible accuracy, and vanished before counterattacks could be organized. Intelligence officers struggled to explain how one submarine could sink multiple destroyers in such short time frames, given that conventional doctrine held submarines should avoid escorts entirely. The truth was simpler than Japanese analysts imagined. Dealey had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit destroyer vulnerabilities. He understood that Japanese anti-submarine doctrine emphasized aggressive charges, assuming submarines would dive and attempt to escape. By turning toward attacking destroyers and firing down the throat shots, Dealey transformed the destroyer's aggression into suicidal charges. The geometry favored Harder. A destroyer charging at high speed could not maneuver quickly enough to avoid torpedoes once they were launched at close range. The warship's narrow bow profile, while harder to hit than a broadside target, actually concentrated damage when torpedoes struck. A single hit on the bow would flood forward compartments, slowing the destroyer and making her vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Hits amidships struck machinery spaces and magazines, causing catastrophic explosions. The tactic required nerves of steel and absolute confidence in torpedo performance, but when executed correctly, it turned destroyer hunters into destroyer prey. By the end of Harder's third patrol, Dealey had sunk 4 destroyers and 3 cargo ships, establishing a record that astounded submarine force commanders. Admiral Lockwood personally debriefed Dealey upon Harder's return, seeking to understand the tactics that produced such extraordinary results. Dealey's explanation was characteristically direct. He calculated firing solutions carefully, closed to ranges where missing was nearly impossible, and trusted his crew to execute precisely under extreme pressure. The mathematics were straightforward, the courage required was exceptional. Harder's 4th War Patrol, conducted from March through May 1944, continued the pattern of aggressive destroyer hunting combined with merchant ship attacks. Operating in the Marianas and Western Carolines, Harder sank 3 destroyers, 2 cargo ships, and damaged several other vessels. One engagement particularly demonstrated Dealey's tactical mastery. On April 13th, Harder encountered a convoy consisting of 2 cargo ships, escorted by 4 destroyers. The heavy escort presence would have discouraged most commanders from attacking. Dealey spent 3 hours maneuvering Harder into position between the convoy and its destination, then surfaced after dark and used radar to track the approaching ships. When the convoy was within 2,000 yards, Dealey fired a spread of 6 torpedoes in rapid succession, aiming for both cargo ships and the nearest destroyer. Explosions erupted across the convoy as torpedoes found their targets. Both cargo ships took multiple hits and began sinking immediately. The destroyer, struck by 2 torpedoes, broke in half and went down within minutes. The surviving escorts scattered in confusion, dropping depth charges randomly, while Harder slipped away in the darkness. The attack lasted less than 15 minutes from first torpedo launch to final withdrawal, yet it destroyed 3 ships and threw an entire convoy into chaos. Japanese naval authorities, analyzing the mounting destroyer losses, began issuing warnings to escort commanders about the Phantom submarine operating in the Marianas. They advised destroyers to approach suspected submarine contacts more cautiously, to use depth charges from safer ranges rather than charging in close, and to coordinate attacks with multiple vessels rather than acting independently. These new procedures, born from necessity after losing numerous destroyers to Harder's tactics, represented a fundamental shift in Japanese anti-submarine doctrine. Unfortunately for the Japanese Navy, the new procedures came too late and were implemented too inconsistently to prevent further losses. Dealey and other American submarine commanders continued exploiting destroyer aggressiveness throughout 1944, sinking Japanese escorts faster than they could be replaced. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Harder's 5th War Patrol would prove to be both the submarine's greatest triumph and her final mission. Departing Pearl Harbor on May 26, 1944, Dealey received orders to join a coordinated submarine attack group operating in the Sibuyan Sea and South China Sea. This wolf pack, consisting of Harder, USS Hake, and USS Harder, was tasked with interdicting Japanese naval forces, evacuating from threatened positions in the Southwest Pacific. The operation came at a critical moment in the Pacific War. American forces were preparing to invade the Mariana Islands, particularly Saipan and Tinian, which would bring B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands. The Japanese combined fleet was positioning to counter this thrust, concentrating forces at Tawi Tawi anchorage in the southern Philippines. American intelligence tracked these movements through radio intercepts, providing submarine commanders with invaluable information about enemy dispositions and movement schedules. On June 6th, while transiting to the patrol area, Harder encountered a convoy of 3 tankers, escorted by 2 destroyers off Tawi Tawi. Dealey maneuvered for attack, but one destroyer detected Harder's presence and charged to attack. Dealey executed a down-the-throat shot at 700 yards range, firing 3 torpedoes directly at the oncoming destroyer's bow. 2 torpedoes struck, causing massive explosions that broke the destroyer's back. The warship sank so quickly that the second destroyer, still charging toward Harder's last known position, nearly collided with her sinking sister ship. Confusion among the Japanese escorts allowed Dealey to maneuver for a follow-up attack. He fired 4 torpedoes at the surviving destroyer, scoring 2 hits that sent her to the bottom within minutes. In less than 10 minutes, Harder had destroyed both escorts, leaving the tankers defenseless. Dealey sank all 3 tankers with his remaining torpedoes, then withdrew before Japanese aircraft could arrive. The attack demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of American submarine tactics against Japanese convoy protection methods. 5 ships destroyed, 0 damage to Harder, total elapsed time approximately 30 minutes. Over the next 3 days, June 7th through 9th, Harder conducted reconnaissance of Tawi Tawi anchorage, identifying battleships, carriers, and cruisers of the Japanese combined fleet. Dealey transmitted detailed reports of Japanese naval positions, providing American commanders with crucial intelligence about enemy strength and dispositions. This reconnaissance mission, as important as any combat engagement, helped shape American operational plans for the upcoming Battle of the Philippine Sea. On June 9th, while withdrawing from Tawi Tawi, Harder encountered another destroyer conducting anti-submarine patrol. Dealey fired a down-the-throat spread that sank the destroyer with 2 torpedo hits. This was Harder's 5th destroyer kill in 4 days, an achievement unprecedented in submarine warfare history. Japanese naval authorities, receiving reports of multiple destroyer losses in the same area within days, concluded that American submarines had developed new weapons or tactics that made them far more deadly than previously believed. The truth was both simpler and more threatening than Japanese analysts imagined. American submarines had reliable torpedoes, aggressive commanders, well-trained crews, and tactics specifically designed to exploit Japanese doctrinal weaknesses. On June 21st, Harder rendezvoused with Hake and Haddo to coordinate attacks on Japanese convoys transiting the South China Sea. The 3 submarines operated as a loose wolf pack, sharing intelligence and coordinating positions to maximize coverage of Japanese shipping routes. On June 22nd, the group attacked a convoy, with Harder sinking a destroyer and a tanker, while Hake damaged a cargo ship. The coordinated attack demonstrated the increased effectiveness possible when multiple submarines operated together, sharing information and supporting each other's attacks. Japanese escorts, dealing with threats from multiple directions, found themselves unable to protect their charges effectively. American submarine wolfpack tactics, still in their early development, would eventually become standard procedure, multiplying the effectiveness of individual submarines through coordination and mutual support. Harder's final engagement occurred on August 24, 1944, in Dasol Bay off the western coast of Luzon in the Philippines. Dealey had brought Harder into the shallow bay to attack Japanese shipping hugging the coast. At approximately 0300 hours, Japanese escort vessels detected Harder's presence and began a coordinated depth charge attack. The escorts, operating in shallow water where sonar was more effective and depth charges more deadly, bracketed Harder with patterns that detonated dangerously close to the submarine's hull. Dealey attempted to escape to deeper water, but the shallow bay limited his maneuvering options. For nearly 3 hours, escorts pounded Harder with depth charges while the submarine tried desperately to slip past them to safety. At approximately 0600 hours, a pattern of depth charges detonated directly above Harder's pressure hull. The explosions crushed compartments, ruptured the hull, and sent the submarine plunging to the bottom in 150 feet of water. There were no survivors. All 83 officers and men aboard Harder died when the submarine went down. The loss was not immediately known to American forces. Harder simply failed to respond to radio calls and did not arrive at her scheduled rendezvous point. After waiting the customary period for submarines that might be conducting attacks or evading enemy forces, she was officially declared lost on September 29, 1944. The Navy did not learn the circumstances of her loss until after the war, when captured Japanese records revealed the details of the engagement that destroyed her. Samuel Dealey was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions during Harder's 5th patrol, particularly for the destruction of 5 destroyers in 4 days and the crucial reconnaissance of Tawi Tawi anchorage. The citation praised his conspicuous gallantry, intrepidity, and complete disregard for personal safety in pressing home his attacks. Dealey also received 4 Navy Crosses, making him one of the most decorated submarine commanders in American naval history, despite a combat career spanning just over 1 year. Harder received the Presidential Unit Citation for her 5th patrol and was credited with sinking 18 ships, totaling approximately 54,000 tons, including 5 destroyers confirmed destroyed. Post-war analysis of Japanese records revised these figures upward, crediting Harder with 22 ships totaling approximately 72,000 tons. Among American submarines, Harder ranked among the top performers for both number of ships sunk and total tonnage destroyed. More significantly, her record of 5 confirmed destroyer kills in 4 days remained unmatched throughout the war, establishing a standard of aggressive anti-escort warfare that influenced submarine tactics for decades afterward. The Japanese Navy's reaction to Harder's rampage through their destroyer forces revealed the strategic impact of aggressive submarine warfare. After losing multiple destroyers to down-the-throat attacks, Japanese commanders issued new directives, emphasizing caution in anti-submarine operations. Destroyers were instructed to avoid charging directly at suspected submarine positions, to coordinate attacks with multiple vessels, and to use depth charges from safer ranges rather than closing to point-blank distance. These defensive measures, born from necessity after devastating losses, represented a fundamental shift in Japanese naval doctrine. The strategic implications extended beyond tactical adjustments. Every destroyer sunk by Harder was a vessel unavailable for convoy escort, amphibious operation support, or fleet screening duties. Japanese destroyer losses throughout the war created cascading effects across their entire naval capability. Convoys sailed with inadequate protection, making them vulnerable to submarine attacks. Amphibious operations proceeded without sufficient fire support, reducing their effectiveness. The combined fleet operated without adequate screening forces, leaving capital ships exposed to submarine and air attacks. Japan's inability to replace destroyed escorts at a rate matching losses meant their naval capability progressively degraded throughout 1944 and 1945. American submarine attacks on destroyers, pioneered by commanders like Dealey, accelerated this decline by targeting the vessels essential for protecting everything else. The mathematics were brutal but undeniable. Japan began the war with approximately 120 modern destroyers. By August 1945, fewer than 40 remained operational, and most of those were damaged or fuel-starved. American submarines, aircraft, and surface forces had systematically destroyed or disabled the destroyer force, leaving Japan's merchant marine and remaining capital ships defensively impotent. Harder's legacy within the submarine force was immediate and profound. Dealey's tactical innovations, particularly the down-the-throat shot against charging destroyers, were analyzed, documented, and incorporated into submarine warfare doctrine. Submarine school instructors used Harder's patrol reports as teaching materials, showing new commanders how aggressive tactics combined with precise execution could achieve results that seemed impossible under conventional doctrine. Dealey's emphasis on crew training, particularly his insistence on constant drilling of fire control procedures and emergency protocols, became standard practice throughout the submarine force. His leadership style, combining aggressive tactical decision-making with genuine respect for crew capabilities, influenced a generation of submarine commanders who sought to emulate his balance of courage and calculation. The submarine force erected no grand monuments to Harder or Dealey, but their impact on naval warfare doctrine exceeded anything monuments could memorialize. The human cost of submarine warfare, embodied in Harder's loss with all hands, represented the stark reality behind the statistics and tactics. 83 men died when Harder went down, each with families who received telegrams informing them their son, husband, or father would not be coming home. The submarine service sustained the highest casualty rate of any branch of the American military during World War II. Of approximately 16,000 submariners who served on war patrols, 3,600 died, a loss rate exceeding 22%. 52 American submarines were lost during the war, taking their crews with them. These losses occurred in silence and secrecy, far from home waters, often with no witnesses to record their final moments. Families waited months before receiving official confirmation that submarines were overdue and presumed lost. The uncertainty was agonizing, the finality devastating. Yet submariners continued volunteering throughout the war, knowing the risks and accepting them as necessary costs of achieving strategic objectives. The submarine war in the Pacific achieved results disproportionate to the resources committed. The submarine force never exceeded 16,000 men at sea, representing less than 2% of total Navy personnel. Yet these submarines accounted for 55% of all Japanese shipping losses during the war, sinking over 4 million tons of merchant vessels and 1,350 warships. They destroyed Japan's ability to import raw materials, export finished goods, and move military forces between theaters. By 1945, Japan's economy was strangled, her factories idle for lack of raw materials, her cities starving for lack of imported food, her military forces scattered across conquered territories without hope of reinforcement or resupply. American submarines achieved this strategic paralysis through 4 years of relentless attacks conducted in hostile waters thousands of miles from friendly bases. Commanders like Dealey exemplified the aggressive spirit and tactical innovation that made this campaign successful. In 1952, 8 years after Harder's loss, the Navy commissioned a new submarine, USS Harder, SS 568, named in honor of Dealey's boat. This Harder served throughout the Cold War, carrying the name and legacy forward through decades of deterrent patrols and training operations. The tradition continued in 1974, when the Navy commissioned USS Samuel Dealey, DE 1006, a destroyer escort named for the Medal of Honor recipient whose courage and tactical genius established standards of submarine warfare excellence. These vessels carried forward a legacy forged in combat, reminding subsequent generations that aggressive leadership, combined with skilled execution, could achieve objectives that seemed impossible under conventional approaches. The story of USS Harder and Samuel Dealey demonstrates that in warfare, as in all human endeavors, exceptional individuals can fundamentally alter what is considered possible, establishing new standards that inspire others to exceed previous limitations. The lessons learned from Harder's war patrols extended beyond World War II into the Cold War and modern era. Down the throat, shots against approaching threats became standard submarine tactics, taught to every fire control team and practiced in countless training exercises. The principle that aggressive action could seize initiative from supposedly superior forces influenced naval thinking across all warfare domains. Dealey's emphasis on crew training and precise execution under pressure became foundational elements of submarine force culture, shaping how commanders prepare their crews for combat. The recognition that submarines could engage surface warships successfully, rather than avoiding them, expanded concepts of submarine utility and influenced design requirements for post-war nuclear submarines. Every aspect of modern submarine warfare carries traces of innovations pioneered by commanders like Dealey aboard boats like Harder during World War II. The final irony of Harder's story lies in the circumstances of her loss. After surviving engagements with dozens of enemy vessels, after sinking destroyers designed specifically to kill submarines, after operating in the most dangerous waters of the Pacific with apparent invulnerability. Harder was destroyed in shallow coastal waters by escorts using conventional depth charge tactics. There was no dramatic final battle, no heroic last stand, simply a submarine caught in an impossible tactical situation where skill and courage could not overcome unfavorable geometry and overwhelming firepower. This ending, unglamorous and sudden, reflects the reality of submarine warfare where success and disaster often separated by nothing more than chance, timing, or the accident of position. The best submarine with the most skilled crew remained vulnerable to the randomness of combat, the mechanical failure, the unlucky depth charge pattern, the moment of inattention that proved fatal. Dealey and his crew accepted these risks as necessary costs of achieving their mission, demonstrating a form of courage that persists despite full knowledge of probable consequences. The 83 men who died aboard Harder remain with their submarine on the bottom of Audacious Bay, their final resting place undisturbed by salvage operations or memorial expeditions. They are remembered in naval records, in family memories, and in the broader historical understanding of what the submarine campaign achieved. Their sacrifice, along with that of thousands of other submariners who died in similar circumstances throughout the Pacific, purchased strategic results that shortened the war and saved countless lives that would have been lost in prolonged conflict. This calculation, brutal and pragmatic, reflects the terrible mathematics of total war, where lives are traded for strategic advantage and victory justifies costs that would be unthinkable in peace. The submarine force accepted these costs, pressed their attacks regardless of danger, and achieved results that vindicated the sacrifices demanded of them. Harder's crew, from Dealey to the youngest seaman aboard, exemplified this commitment to mission accomplishment regardless of personal cost. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.